So I'll get started. We have a few people here. Okay. So I'm looking at my screen. I'm seeing a few names. Okay. So hi everyone. Um, my name is Gauri. I teach at Anand National University in Ahmedabad, and it would be nice if some of you could put your videos on. I won't judge you for where you're sitting and uh, what you're looking like, but it would be nice to not stare into a black screen. Okay, so please, yeah, do consider switching your videos on for a bit at least. So I had the opportunity to attend the research conference earlier this year in Jaipur and be there for a jury. Uh, so it was quite a nice opportunity to look at the kinds of things that people are interested in. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and then maybe introduce some of the key things that I wanted to talk about. I trained as an architect. I studied at CEPT now many years ago. But after that, I was very interested in research right from the beginning. And so I opted for a research degree, a research master's degree, and then I did a PhD. And I am a researcher and a historian for all practical purposes. In the sense, I'm not a practicing architect. um, what researchers do fundamentally is that they produce knowledge. And that is why it is very interesting that NASA has a research event. And so, what I'm going to share with you are two things. One is a sort of more general idea of, I mean, all of you all are undergraduate students. So, what does research look like in the early stages, which is at an undergraduate level? And should any of you be interested, what would research look like as you go further? So, I'll briefly talk about how we understand research within educational setups. And then I'll come to this thing that I have written, which is about the question, which was turning curiosity into questions. So I'll give an example of a project that I'm currently working on, and I'll give you some background as to how that started. So coming first to undergraduate research. Um, Research is something that as architecture students we are not really trained to do. As architecture students we learn how to synthesize. So when you're looking at a design project, you're looking at space requirements, you're looking at construction, you're looking at technology, you're looking at aesthetics, some question of meaning, and the act of design brings together a lot of these threads. What research does is, in a sense, intellectually, it's the opposite. In research, you have a situation and you're trying to unravel the various things that influence, in our case, an architectural work. So, for the most part, so before I joined Anand for 10 years, I headed, I think, which is India's only postgraduate program in architectural history and research at CEPT. And so, in my general experience, very few students come with any research training, which is fine. I don't think training is a prerequisite for doing research. You can still ask intelligent questions. And that's what I'll come to in a bit. Um, Having said that, many undergraduate programs, many BArch programs have a research component. Some of you may be doing a thesis. And the general idea is that at undergraduate level, you are grappling with questions within the known domain of knowledge. What does that mean? Say you are interested in, um, the emergence of Indo-Saracenic architecture. Okay, so you've grown up in a place that has a lot of colonial architecture, and you're interested in how did the stylistic development of something like this happen, right? Now, the way to go about it would be to find out what other people have written about it and be able to put a set of ideas together in a way that answers that question. At an undergraduate level, that is usually the expectation that you are able to ask a question and you know how to find the answer. to put this into sort of larger context, how is this different from postgraduate research? At a postgraduate level, you're supposed to be able to ask a question to which there may not be any existing answers. You may be asking a question about a situation that we don't know very much about. But again, at postgraduate level, it's not expected that you will necessarily answer the question. So you may ask a question like, why are there variations in colonial architecture across India? Now, we have some idea, but we may not have. Now, that's an advanced question, right? At a PhD level, if you choose to do a PhD, that is the point at which you are expected to make an original contribution to knowledge by doing research. PhD students are asking questions that have not yet been asked and therefore don't have answers either. So, to put it into perspective, undergraduate level, you're asking a question, you're looking at how other people have talked about this, and you're putting together an answer. At postgraduate level, you're asking a question where there is some indication, but there may not be an answer. At doctorate level, you're asking a question and you have to answer that question. Okay, so this is just in terms of level, and I'm saying this because a lot of the research juries that I used to go to, there were a lot of questions about, but इसमें आपका contribution क्या है? Which I think is a bit of a misplaced question because at an undergraduate level, you're not expected to really make a contribution to knowledge. You're expected to develop your own thinking. So, with that, I'll come to the title of today's presentation, which is Turning Curiosity into Questions. Again, this is based on my experience of dealing with research students, teaching research methods for 17, 18 years now. The word research sounds formal, sounds big, and it almost sounds like you have to have a profound question. Many students in their projects feel compelled to ask a big, profound question, right? A good research question is one that can be answered. And I think that is the very important thing to bear in mind. So if I give you an example that we look at, like, if we look at the Stonehenge in England, you all know the Stonehenge, right? The big circle of stones. It's a ceremonial. Now, if you ask a question like, what was the significance of the Stonehenge when it was constructed? Now, there is no way of answering that question because unless the people who constructed it left some records, we have no way of knowing what the significance was, right? But then if you ask a question like, how was the Stonehenge erected? You can triangulate using your understanding as an architect, using some engineering knowledge. You'll be able to say, okay, how do you get such large stones? You can do an analysis of the stones and find out कि ये कहाँ से आया है. And so you can begin to. There are certain questions that you can answer, certain questions you can't. Good research questions are always those that can be answered. The best research questions are those that are anchored in personal curiosity. It is something that excites you, it is something that interests you, and something that you want to find out more about. Those are the best research questions. I'm a firm believer that questions, hypotheses, aims, objectives, methods, all of these are very important, but that's not the purpose. The purpose is that you have a question that's kind of bugging you and you're thinking, हाँ but ये कैसे किया होगा, right? And in order to answer that, you are drawing on your training as an architect in order to answer that question. Okay? So I'll give you an example of a project that I'm currently working on. Currently, matlab, I've been working on it for about 6 years now. It's been a while. I started working on a history of concrete in India. So I want to tell you about, the curiosity bit of it. Where did that question come from? So when I started the postgraduate program in architectural history, the question that we were dealing with, as a postgraduate program, as an intellectual project, that what are we training students to do? I mean, history is not something that interests many people, and we know that. So the question was, what are we training people to do? So the answer was that we are training people to think about how is architecture produced? How is architecture talked about? What shapes architecture? That was the question. Now, prior to that, I had practiced a little bit, but then I was also in an architecture school. So we knew that a big part of what we were doing was we were training students to make buildings. So, like I said, the research is the intellectual opposite of design as a process. So we said, okay, if as an architecture student, if as an architect, what we are training people to do is how to make buildings, then as a researcher, what we've got to train people to do is to figure out, okay, how are those buildings getting made? Not just now, but also in the past. So we said, okay, we know that the architect designs something, but then we also know that once you go to a construction site, there's a whole set of other people and processes that literally sort of takes over, right? You have building contractors, you have clients, you have material suppliers. Anybody who's also worked on a site knows that decisions can be taken on the basis of so many conditions and not just what the architect thinks, right? Because the architect can think something, but pata chala maal saman khatam ho gaya, concreting karni hai, but there is no RMC machine. There are any number of things that shape how a building actually gets made. So the question that I was very interested in was, okay, so how do buildings get made? Right? And we were looking at a set of buildings in Ahmedabad, actually in and around the SEPT campus. These are buildings that belong to the Ahmedabad Education Society, and these are buildings that were constructed between the 1940s and the 1950s. So the students were mapping out buildings, and it was quite interesting because we saw that many of these buildings had been constructed. The students found that they had been designed by an architect called Atmaram Gajjar. And Atmaram Gajjar practiced in Ahmedabad starting roughly in 1929, and he passed away in 1960. And during those years, he was a prolific builder. He built a large number of buildings across Ahmedabad. What was very interesting, one of the elements that we saw in his building were chhajjas. There were a number of chhajjas, there were a number of fins in the windows. And these fins were quite thin. These are concrete fins, they're quite thin. So we first of all realized that he is doing a number of concrete fins in the 1950s. Ahmedabad is also home to a number of buildings by Le Corbusier, the Milona's building, number of buildings. And many years, well, not many years, about 4 years before that, my husband and I, my husband's also an architect, we were building my parents' house in Jamshedpur, in Jharkhand. And we were trying to get a concrete pardi, a thin concrete, wall, 75 only. We were trying to get it constructed. And very interestingly, the local contractor said, we can't, ये तो हुआ ही नहीं. They told us that minimum आपको इसको 150 centimeters तो करना ही पड़ेगा. Change से नीचे तो हम करेंगे ही नहीं. And I kept thinking that here, all the way in the 1940s, people have constructed very, very thin chhajjas. And here in 2010, I have a building contractor telling me कि change से नीचे तो हम कर ही नहीं सकते हैं. So when we were studying Corbusier's buildings and Atmaram Gajjar's buildings, the question that we were asking is how is it possible to construct thin chhajjas at that point in time when no building contractor is likely to build that today? So it started with a fairly straightforward question कि ये कैसे बनाया होगा, right? From there, we started saying, okay, since we were asking how was this made, the logical question was who constructed it? So then we realized that Atmaram Gajjar very often worked with his brother, who was a building contractor. Then we found that the brother had worked on a number of projects with Atmaram Gajjar, and they had probably, and this we knew because we were trying to say, okay, how do we understand the construction industry? So then we started looking at what do architects do today. So we interviewed some architects who work on very specialist things, and they said that हम अपना team बना के रखते हैं. So if we have a team of people who will execute something very well, we keep that team together. So then we used that to say that, okay, so then it is possible that Atmaram Gajjar's brother also had a team. And the team had gotten trained over a period of time. And so that team was able to construct things. Then we realized that by the 1940s, Atmaram Gajjar and his brother had built so many buildings. And we found the possibility that by the time Le Corbusier came to Ahmedabad, there is already an existing ecosystem of laborers, of building contractors, of material suppliers who know how to execute very high quality concrete. Which is why now in Ahmedabad you see, even today, you get better exposed concrete construction in Ahmedabad than you get it in most other places in the country. Now, if you zoom out, so I've been doing this research on concrete for a long time now. Most recently, I wrote an article about Sanskar Kendra. If you look at the geography of exposed concrete construction in India, it is concentrated in and around Delhi and it is concentrated in and around Ahmedabad. And both these places owe their exposed concrete construction to the team that Le Corbusier worked with. So the question of how might this have been constructed has eventually led to a much larger project. So, couple of things here. One is that obviously we were following our curiosity. One question leads to another question. The second, the question that I started with was not what was the history of concrete. Big question, very difficult to answer. The easier question to answer is what do we usually think of as the beginning? So if I ask even now when I ask most people about what do you think is the earliest concrete building in India, and they'd be like, maybe with Le Corbusier, maybe Doshi. Some people who live in and around Pondicherry will be like, no, maybe the Golconda House. But actually, when you say, okay, but how do you build something that is so complicated? Whenever you look at the historical development of something, the complicated thing is not the beginning. The complicated thing is sort of the pinnacle of the process. The process has started much earlier. So then the question that we followed was, आज के ज़माने में ये construct करना इतना complicated है, how might Corbusier have managed so much exposed concrete? Then you say, okay, he had to have a team because Corbusier खुद तो construction कर नहीं रहे थे. There has to be an entire labor force. So then we found out that there was a local engineering company called KB Mehta and Sons. They are around even today. They were practicing in the 1950s, and they had newly started. Then I interviewed an engineer who worked with Corbusier in Sanskar Kendra. So धीरे धीरे करके, by asking a simple question of how was this building constructed, you begin to open up a far more complex landscape of historical developments. So, my suggestion to whoever wants to do research is that when you're asking a good question is one where you have an idea about how you're going to answer it. You don't have to have the answer. If you have the answer, it's not much of a question. But you have to have an idea कि इसका अगर जवाब देना है तो क्या ढूंढना पड़ेगा, right? The temptation is to ask what we call a rhetorical question. Now, what is a rhetorical question? Rhetoric is something that you say for effect. You ask a question that sounds profound, but उसका कोई जवाब देने का, there's no way of answering it. So if you ask a question like, what is the meaning of life? How are you going to answer that question? It's one of those big, profound questions. And the closest answer you get to something like that is someone like Douglas Adams. If those of you who have um, have read or know of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So there's this, it's a famous science fiction book by this writer called Douglas Adams. And there are these two travelers, they are traveling across the galaxy and they reach the far end of the galaxy, where all the wisdom of the galaxy lies. And they ask that, so what is the meaning of life? And the answer that comes back is 42. And, they're like, what on earth is 42? It can be anything you mean, but that's the only answer. And Douglas Adams doesn't give any explanation. But interestingly, other people who have read Douglas Adams's work say that Douglas Adams was also into computing. And 42 was some kind of, at that time, 1970s, whenever, computer code for anything you want it to be. It was the binary computer language code for anything you want it to be. So, what is the meaning of life? Anything you want it to be. So, my point is that if you ask a question like, what makes people happy? You can answer it. If you ask, what is the meaning of life? You can't answer that. So, good questions, a good research question is not one that confuses you. That's a bad question. A good research question is one that opens up a window into a process, into an idea. So a good question is definitely one that's answerable. Um, at the same time, you don't want to ask yes or no questions. You don't want to ask what would a yes or no question be? Did Shah Jahan build the Taj Mahal? It's a yes or no question. Okay? Useless. Doesn't get you anywhere. How many different materials did Shah Jahan use for building the Taj Mahal? Again, not a very helpful question because this kind of question has what we call an enumerative answer. You list marble, this, that. Again, it doesn't say anything further. What does the Taj Mahal tell us about, the state of Mughal architecture or the state of Mughal construction? What does the Taj Mahal tell us about the symbolic universe of Mughal architecture? There you have questions which begin to open up something and expand your understanding. So, good research questions are those that are answerable. And ideally, as you start to answer them, you are able to open up more questions. Good research questions are those where you have some idea of how you're going to be able to answer it. You have to have some idea of what are the sources of information you need in order to answer this. You have some idea of your capacities. And a good research question, most importantly in our case, is one that really draws on our training as architects. As an architect, if you ask a question about real estate prices, you haven't studied real estate. You don't understand economics, right? And I get a lot of students will say that I'm interested in philosophy, I'm interested in gender, I'm interested in finance. Yeah, but you don't have the training, right? So finally, if you think of doing a research paper somewhat, like an exam or a competition, आपने पढ़ाई कुछ की है और आप क्वेश्चन सिलेबस के बाहर का पूछ रहे हो. So a good research question is one that really draws from your background training and the skills that you have developed as an architect. And those skills are considerable. So being able to articulate a good research question is as much a testimony to your education as the answer is. So I'll stop there and I'll open this up for questions. If anybody has any questions at all, feel free to, I don't know, unmute yourself and ask or type into the chat window. However. You can literally ask me anything. Okay, I can help you out. If you have multiple questions in mind, I can help you pick one.
Okay, ma'am, can we have one example maybe of a question related to architecture, like research in architecture? Just one example of it.
Oh, so a lot of my research at the moment is on construction history. So, construction history. So, for instance, mm, mm, so with regards to my concrete project, I think one of the questions that I've been looking at is, like I said, that in order for the post-independence architecture to be the kind of iconic architecture that it is, what were the background processes that kind of happened? But that's very specific. And also, I've been obsessing over concrete for a fair bit now, so I have to think non-concrete question. Maybe if people can give me an idea of topics, something they're working on, then I can throw out questions. That you could look at this, or you could. So I think you'll have to give me.
Yeah, I can do that, I guess. So I'll just like to know from the people in the audience. So how many of you are participating in the research conference this year? You can raise hands. That would be great.
Yeah, a few people have. Mm.
Okay, so have you guys started with your abstracts? Maybe like yeah, just what ma'am said. You can maybe put pour in your topics with which you started. She can give suggestions. We can do that. And there's one question in chat box, I guess.
I'll take a look. Right. When I read the brief for this competition, but eventually I found my. Right. Okay. When you read the brief for this competition, you found all the sub-themes amusing and quite intriguing. I will need to look at the brief for the competition. I don't remember what it was now. Okay, could you just give me a sense of what the brief is? I just saw something. Sorry, you'll have
So
to
it
tell me
is
what the brief
broadly
is. Huh? I
about,
don't.
yeah, I'll share the brief with you, but it is broadly about, uh, okay, so it is broadly about that these days students are not being that practical, or maybe just basically it's moving more into AI and less of practical hands-on learning. So
Hmm?
that is where today architecture is moving into. So people are forgetting the real essence of learning and they're moving to shortcuts and AI-based learning.
Hmm.
The broad theme.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, I don't know which one is your first name, Pir Mohammed Khan. So my guess is that the theme to me sounds like a provocation about how learning has changed over the years. So I would imagine that it's a good idea to try and find an example where you think that learning has changed, or you think the ways in which the ways in which learning about architecture has changed, and you can focus on, you can then sort of, it's always good to have an example, because then you have the larger concept. The larger concept is that artificial intelligence is changing how we learn, and then you have a specific example of some difference that you find between a case where you used AI versus you tried to, do something uh, without using AI. And so the way I would usually work is I would put a few thoughts together. So what all ideas do I have? So for a topic like this, what I would do is I'd think back on, okay, trying to write something using AI, trying to write something without using AI. I would note down, okay, what are the differences that I'm understanding? Then I would go and read a little bit about what are people saying about learning in AI, what are people saying about architecture and AI. And I'd look at a bunch of those things and say, okay, what's really standing out to me? Uh, uh, what is really uh, speaking to me, and in which aspect? So, for instance, if you want to talk about drafting by hand versus using Midjourney to generate an image, so you need, for me, I always need some kind of what we call empirical material, which is like some first-hand thing. Once you have a sense of what those ideas are, उसमें से फिर question आप formulate करोगे. So usually question formulation does not happen at the beginning. It happens somewhat at the midway stage. Once you sort of started reading a little bit, started putting some thoughts together, then you say, Acha, what is the difference between AI usage and non AI usage? So you begin to have an idea, then you test it out a little more. Then by the time you're writing the end of whatever, then you reframe your question to fit what you're writing. So that's like the cheat code that I'm giving you. This happens even at a PhD level, right? You start with a question, you start with some inquiry, some idea, find a little bit, and then 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, you reframe your question because that's where you have to do a defense. Reframe your question, write something up, try and find out more. Then by the time you finish your PhD, you come back and rewrite your question. So I think my suggestion would be that if you have lots of thoughts, write all of them down. And as a process of thinking through a research project, I think it's definitely crucial that you cannot do it in your head. You will have to have lots and lots of notes. Research is also slightly different from design in the sense that it's different, but it's also similar in the sense कि जब आप design कर रहे हो, you have to sketch a lot. You still need to have a lot of visual material. When you're researching, you need to have lots of notes. So I think you will need to go through. There isn't like one approach. You can't figure out हाँ ये approach है इस पे चलूंगा और मेरा हो जाएगा ऐसा नहीं होता है आपको तीन चार चीजें ट्राई करनी पड़ेंगी एंड देन यू विल फिगर आउट कि इसमें से व्हाट्स वर्किंग फॉर मी and how am I thinking. So researching is definitely, it's a messy process. You're going to have to try a number of things, and if you found a number of things amusing, write down ideas for everything. I mean, the best way to find an approach is to find five approaches and then rate them in the order of which interests you in terms of difficulty level. Yeah. So I would suggest if you have lots of thoughts, write all of them down and then choose. So I hope that helps you. Kashvi's question is architecture is only about concrete topics? No, anything. So research in architecture deals with anything that focuses on the built environment. So if you have a question like how architecture affects lifestyle, I think architecture affects people, of course. I think the operative thing here is do you know how to answer that question? When you talk about architecture affecting lifestyle, the crucial thing is that isme fir aap, you can't analyze buildings, you have to interview people. Every question will entail a certain method. So if you the moment you're talking about people and people's perceptions or people's lifestyle, you will have to define what you mean by lifestyle. Are you talking about things people do, or how they decorate their house, or ideas of leisure, ideas of work? Uh, you'll have to define it and you'll have to find a method. So a lot of architecture deals with life, the universe, and everything. So I think it's really a question of the method that that you will follow. Thanks for the thing, Devansh. I'm guessing that's the brief. Ishika. Mm. um, I'm going to give a very useless answer, Ishika. It's trial and error. But again, like I said, it's partly trial and error, but it's also, um, as architects, we generally believe that uh, the creative act is a kind of individual creative act. There is us and there is our design. Research is always a situated activity. ठीक है आप जो भी सवाल पूछोगे आपके पहले लोगों ने पूछा होगा. So the best way to figure out is how have other people done this? Okay, so if I pick up the earlier question that Kashvi asked about architecture affecting lifestyle, and now with kind of, and not AI here, I would say that, or actually even AI, type this in, because whatever question you have, chap it, put it into Claude or whatever else you use, and say, give me a research proposal for this. And then figure out that अगर ऐसा research proposal है तो आप इस पे काम कर सकते हो. एंड अगर आपको ये काम करना है तो वो कैसे करोगे. ठीक है. सो the question really is that there are enough ways. I think you have to ask yourself whether you can do it. Okay. So if I use an analogy, I find analogies very, very helpful. Imagine that I'm very fond of Japanese food, yeah? And but मुझे बनाना है Japanese food. तो I go to a restaurant and first I'll have to eat Japanese food, no? तो मैं जाके खाऊं, पता करूं कि कैसा है. Then I find look for a recipe. रेसिपी मिलने से तो खाना नहीं बन जाता है. सो दैट्स व्हाट आई मीन कि चैट जीपीटी अगर आपको रिसर्च प्रपोजल दे देगा, उससे रिसर्च नहीं होना है. यू स्टिल हैव टू फिगर आउट कि इस पे आप काम कर सकते हो कि नहीं, है ना. सो आई विल गेट अ रेसिपी फॉर रामेन. आई स्टिल हैव टू फिगर आउट हाउ टू डू इट, नो. जापानीज फूड भी छोड़ दो, विल पिक समथिंग बेसिक लाइक रोटी. ठीक है. आपके पास रेसिपी हो सकती है, कॉम्प्लिकेटेड भी नहीं है. रोटी भी आपने बहुत खाई होगी, बट आप रोटी बना के देखो. And then you realize how much time it takes to actually master something as basic as making a roti. You have the knowledge, you have the case study, you have all the instructions. You still have to do it yourself. And as you do it at every step of the process, you refine your judgment. Starting with, आपने आटा लिया, अगली बार कोई दूसरा आटा मिलेगा तो आपको, यू विल रियलाइज ओ आटा दो दो तरीके के होते हैं. आप पानी डालोगे, देन somebody टेल यू अरे थोड़ा गर्म पानी डाल के देखो. देन यू ऑलरेडी रियलाइज अरे ऑलरेडी इतनी वेरिएशन. गर्म पानी डालो तो कुछ होता है ये कर. फिर किस टाइप का बेलन यूज कर रहे हो, किस टाइप का, इन गुजराती वर्ड्स कॉल्ड ओरसिया बेलन, यूज दैट. व्हाट काइंड ऑफ, within a simple thing like rotli, you find so many variations, but you will find those variations only as you go about the process. ट्रायल एंड एरर से ही होगा. आप जितने भी रेसिपीज ले लो, जितने भी केस स्टडीज कर लो, माय पॉइंट इज यू विल हैव टू ट्राई. Whatever your research question, whatever your project, you will have to try out ways in which to do it. The important thing to bear in mind is that anything like this takes multiple attempts. Okay? You will need to do this multiple times. तो किसी भी आप क्वेश्चन फॉर्मुलेट करने में भी मल्टीपल अटेम्प्ट्स लगेंगे, उसको आंसर करने में भी मल्टीपल अटेम्प्ट्स लगेंगे. सो बिल्कुल इट्स लाइक लर्निंग टू डिजाइन, नो. इमेजिन दैट यू आर एक्सप्लेनिंग टू अ राइटर हाउ टू डिजाइन. आप क्या बोलोगे, रिक्वायरमेंट्स ले लो, बिल्डिंग्स देख लो, बिल्डिंग बन जाएगा? नहीं, ड्राफ्टिंग भी सीखना पड़ेगा. थिंग्स विल टेक टाइम, सो यू विल हैव टू कीप ट्राइंग दिस. या, I'm not telling you how to go about that, because now any, how to do research, you put it into ChatGPT, it'll tell you how to do research. What you want to do is you want to learn how to do it yourself, which means you have to tap into what are your skills, what are your questions, what are your ways of thinking. Huh. Sakshi, I'm interested in the history of buildings. How are you going to work on that? How are you going to work on that? Meaning, you want to work on that? Uh, so, Sakshi, you'll have to clarify for me, because I'm seeing two questions here. One is you're asking, how are you going to work on this thing of the history of buildings? But the other thing you're asking is, you know, you can't get the correct answer. Um, in most cases, especially when we work with history, mm, so I will sound, the past. We can know anything about the past only through the sources of information we have. Okay? To know about about how buildings were made. Yeah, you will need sources of information. तो विथ रिगार्ड्स टू बिल्डिंग्स दो तरह की हो सकती हैं. एक तो हम आर्किटेक्ट्स हैं. वी नो हाउ बिल्डिंग्स आर पुट टुगेदर, राइट? मतलब अगर आप एक डिटेल देख रहे हो, थिंकिंग लाइक एन आर्किटेक्ट, यू विल बी एबल टू से हाँ, this is what the builders were thinking, this is how X was done, and this is how. So अगर आप कोई रूफ देख रहे हो, say there's a timber roof, एज एन आर्किटेक्ट आप इतना तो बोल पाओगे कि टिम्बर का रूफ है, सम कारपेंटर वुड हैव बीन इन्वॉल्व्ड, सोफिस्टिकेटेड जॉइनरी है, ये जॉइनरी के लिए इतनी टूल्स लगी होंगी, वॉट एवर, यू नो. So I think that is where architectural history is quite unique, because we can decode buildings. We can decode buildings to understand a lot about how things were constructed. Like I was giving you the example of Corbusier's Millowners Association building, what's called Atma. So उसके पूरे facade पे वो पतले पतले, it has fins, and because as a in my little experience of practice, I know getting fins constructed is complicated. I use that knowledge and apply that to the case of Corbusier, because things don't become easier in the past. Things are always more difficult in the past. Things are easier now. तो आज के ज़माने में ही फिल्म्स कंस्ट्रक्ट करना डिफिकल्ट था, तो उस टाइम पे देयर मस्ट हैव बीन स्पेशलिस्ट लेबरर्स. अब सवाल ये आता है कि वो स्पेशलिस्ट लेबरर्स के बारे में आपको इंफॉर्मेशन कैसे मिलेगा. तो उसके लिए then you will need more sources of information. So then we'll start looking at what historians call the archive. Archives are institutions that collect documents. So all of Le Corbusier's letters are currently at the Foundation, Le Corbusier Foundation in Paris. हर चिट्ठी जो Corbusier ने लिखी थी with sketches and diagrams, वो सब है. Once you have access to that, then you will be able to analyze further. If you're serious about this, my suggestion is that you will need an advanced degree. Training to do research is specialist training. You will need you will need additional educational qualification. And if this sort of stuff interests you, and that additional qualification is not easy, because I remember when people used to come into the history program, except they thought they'll be just reading and listening to lectures and writing. They didn't realize कि कितनी सारी drawings बनानी पड़ेगी. Obviously, it's additional work. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, I would suggest reading more, getting an additional degree. If you're curious about it, there's a whole bunch of books on building histories, construction history. It's an emerging field now. For the past 20 years, there's a lot of stuff on that. So I hope that gives you some insights. Uh, Right. That's a very good question, Bhumi. That once you started looking up for the research done on that, and you're not able to think of any new approach, um, I would just ask you here, if you haven't done it already, to organize your thoughts. When you say that you've looked up a lot of research, my general advice is, for research purposes, looking up something is basically pull out the paper, say it's an article, annotate it, make notes, what are the people saying, and then you begin to organize. मान लीजिए आपने 10-15 articles पढ़े हैं. What are different authors saying? Are there any contradictions in what they are saying? How does this connect with your experience? Again, remember, that's why I said you turn your curiosity into questions. We don't enter research as objective outsiders. There's no such thing. We always enter a research question based on our experience of things. As you train, as you grow, you have more experience, and so you're able to ask a wider set of questions. What are authors saying about AI use, learning? How does it relate, resonate, contradict with your experiences. That's where you will get your perspective from. I hope that answers your question. Uh, I've been researching, and the only thing that I end up is this enough? Um, Also, a very good question, Kushi. When is it enough? Uh, Again, to give a rhetorical answer, never. But I'd ask you to put a number. Okay, so the number, like for postgraduate level researchers and above, the general expectation is that if you're researching a subject, I would imagine that you should have read 40, 50 pieces on that subject. And when I say 40, 50 pieces, I mean scholarly works, not Wikipedia entries, not AI essays, not Dizine, not Arc Daily. No. Journal articles and books. You read about 40. Okay, let's say about 40. Make notes from all of that. If you read that much, I think you'd be, quite sorted. And if you know that if your research is moving in the right direction, uh, there's no way of knowing. But again, this is, you guys have the huge benefit of AI right here. Whatever is your understanding at the moment, write it up, chuck it into one of these AI things and say, tell me what I'm missing. And AI will tell you what you're missing, right? Use AI as a thing to have a conversation with, but use AI as a friend who's somewhat dependable in terms of knows where what is, but you don't trust entirely because, you know, it's given to bullshitting sometimes. So think of AI as a friend जो ऐसे जुगाड़ करके ले आएंगे तुम्हारे लिए कुछ, but आप पूरा भरोसा नहीं कर सकते. So, is this enough? That's one way of intellectually, methodologically. The other way, in terms of is it enough, the practical thing is how much time do you have? Do you have 1 year to do this? Do you have 6 months to do this? Um, how much time do you propose to spend on it? Okay? And that is what you're looking for. So say you're trying to write something in 1 week's time and आपके पास पूरा time, सब कुछ, like if you're able to spend 2 hours a day and you have 10 hours with you, make those 10 hours count. What can you do in 10 hours? That's what you're looking. And this is true across the board, whether you're doing undergraduate thesis, whether you're writing a paper, whether you're doing a PhD. Time and energy and resources is वो finite होता है. हम किसी भी चीज पे endlessly हम ढूंढते नहीं रह सकते. Yeah. So I hope that helps you. Yeah, I'm researching the kitchen as a socio-spatial construct. Look out for material. Yeah. Where are the sources you would prefer to look for these materials? Um, Unless you have access to a very, very good library, I would say AI is your best friend. Put this into AI, and I know it sounds like I'm saying AI, लो AI पे देख लो. मैं ये नहीं कह रही हूँ कि शॉर्टकट मारो. ये जो आप मुझसे ये जो सवाल पूछ रहे हो कि where do I look for sources? This is the sort of stuff you want to use AI for. Tell me what are the most important people who have written about kitchens. After AI gives you the list, then you go to some major libraries and check. Pick up the books. Kitchens पे मुझे immediately याद नहीं आ रहा है, and of course, because I've spent my entire life at SEPT. If you have access to the SEPT library, use that. I did my PhD in the UK. I would suggest using online libraries. There are any number of digital sources, but so there is something called a Frankfurt kitchen, right? The Frankfurt kitchen is a great example of a kitchen as a space that produces very specific relationships. It was standardized after World War II. Then you might want to expand to say, okay, who are kitchen is part of a house. Who are the people who have written about houses and the kind of social life it engenders? And you might sort of, hopefully, it will lead you to someone like Anthony King or Madhvi Desai's book on bungalows. So yeah, it's like अगर आप छुट्टी पे जा रहे हो एंड आपको सो से यू डिसाइड टू फ्लाई फ्रॉम बॉम्बे टू दुबई, ठीक है? तो आप ढूंढोगे ना कि कैसे जाओगे, तो आप गूगल करोगे, गूगल विल गिव यू सम ऑप्शंस, दोज ऑप्शंस विल टेक यू टू थर्ड पार्टी साइट्स। एक कुछ क्लियर ट्रिप होगा, एक मेक माई ट्रिप होगा, एक आप वहां जा जाके सब चेक करोगे, फिर आप अपने ट्रैवल एजेंट को फोन करोगे कि भाई मुझे द सेम लॉजिक अप्लाइज when you're looking for information also. Try multiple sources, ask different people, talk to whoever will give you, and collect all that, and then you make an informed decision. That is very important. Because ऐसा तो है नहीं कि गूगल पे जो पहली फ्लाइट आती है आप उसको बुक कर लेते हो, ढूंढते हैं. Research is exactly the same. It's the equivalent of planning a holiday. The research that you would do for planning a holiday, and it's like if you plan a holiday, you're not going to trust ChatGPT, no? Same logic. You can't trust, but it's a useful starting point. Yep. Cool. Okay. So yeah, I think if if anyone has anything else, otherwise, yeah, we can call it a day and you guys can go start working.
Okay, like yeah, I really love the example that you gave in the end. I think planning a holiday is equivalent to research. Totally, I think that would be help. But apart from that, so you also mentioned about digital libraries. So I'd like to know from the people in this webinar. So do you guys feel the need of access to some digital library that you do not have right now? So being from NASA India, maybe we could help for such resources for you if you give us some. Basically, if you ask for it. So I think if you right now wanna put forward something like that, that this is one library which is something paid or subscription based, and you want access to that, you may let us know through any medium, or maybe just type it out in the chat box right now. Or you can email us or WhatsApp, Instagram, anything. So if there's any such digital library or any such sources that you are looking for and you do not have access to such things right now, you can let us know. We may try to help it out and arrange for you. There's one more question in the chat, ma'am. So it states
Yeah.
how to ask a better question.
With practice, Khushi, it's like, how to make better roti, how to play better cricket. Practice, my dear, practice. Lots and lots of practice. Question पूछो, जवाब दे के देखो. Um, and again, this is the one place where I will say that don't use AI. So if you frame a question and you put it into AI and say, yeah, give me a better question, you are not learning, uh, what you needed to change. Neither are you learning to sort of edit your own work, to critique your own line of thinking. Yeah, you practice, but get feedback. So I think definitely use AI to get feedback. But this is one of those things that you just get better with practice. You write, the more you write, I think anybody who's trying to do research, my recommendation is first thing in the morning, you should be writing 500 words a day. As architecture students, we don't train to use language. We are trained to draw. Our abilities tend to be less developed compared to our sketching abilities. So uh, learning to write, ideas and thoughts that are kind of coherent in your head, you give it clearer form. And if you practice writing every day, you begin to close the gap between your thinking and what you're expressing. And as that gets better, you become clearer about आप कहना क्या चाह रहे हो. With that, your questions also start getting better. Yes, it's a vague question. It has only one answer. Write every day. uh, Good resources for research papers. So all major publishers will have, like, it's Google Scholar. Those of, if some of you have not used Google Scholar, it's worth using. Uh, okay, at the risk of, I will not take too much time. Let me try and explain this in 1 minute. Okay. Um, there is a range of knowledge sources that are available. Okay. Now, what is a hierarchy of knowledge sources? Something that's on Wikipedia, anything that's on crowdsourced, that is crowdsourced, anything that's AI, you don't know where the source of that information is. You don't know the judgment that has gone behind that information. Any sort of general source like that is good for getting a quick impression of a particular subject area. Then you have digital magazines. There is slight control of authorship, so you have a slightly better sense कि किसने लिखा है, जिन्होंने लिखा है उनकी qualifications क्या है. So you have a slightly better कि हाँ ये थोड़ा trustworthy है. Then there are research publications. And usme bhi then there are categories. Like you have the high end, which are like the top publishers. Bloomsbury, Routledge, Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press. ये कोई भी किताब छापते हैं ना, तो before publishing the book, they will send the manuscript to 2 or 3 other experts in the field to review, which is called a peer review process. So they would have reviewed it, and then they'd say, "Ha, the book is good enough to print," or they'll say, "Nahi, वापस भेजो, it needs more work." So, when you are saying good resources for research papers, the biggest research sources, just type things into Google. The more difficult question is Google में से जो निकलेगा, how will you choose? And there, my suggestion is, if you look at established journals and publishing houses, journals, Sage Publications करके हैं, उनके journals are amongst the top-rated journals in the world. Um, or if you have anything published by Routledge, Bloomsbury, Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, or any of the American university presses, they are all good quality publications. You can pretty much trust those sources of information. So I hope that gives you some clues. Cool. Then I think we are good to close. Javin, as you suggest.
Yeah, I guess so. We can just wait for 2 more minutes if anyone has any questions.
Sure.
Otherwise, yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for this session. It means a lot.
My pleasure. And I
But
hope
for
for
everyone,
everyone,
so for your information, ma'am was with us as in the jury panel for this last year's NASA India Research Conference as well. So she's seen the work which last year's batch did in their research papers, in their abstracts. So yeah, you must use it at the best in this session. Might be difficult to catch up later. But yeah, thank you so much, ma'am.
my pleasure. And thank you very much for inviting me. And there is a question that has popped up. Uh, Acha, this is, I think, research library we're talking about. I think this is Javin. This is a.
So I think so. I just meant that you may suggest if you want access to any of those. So there are several libraries, but if there's any specific library that you want access to, maybe you just let us know, and NASA India might try to help in getting that for the NASA India associated students. So if not now, you can let us know later. We have our contacts on the NASA India website, or you can text me on WhatsApp. It's my contact is there in the posters. Yeah, previous year citations. So we compiled a book of abstracts last year. So that includes the abstracts, the 15 shortlisted abstracts. So it includes those, and that shall be made live within a few days and shared with you. And along with that, so you might be thinking that the deadline would be over by then. But okay, revealing that we shall be extending the submission deadline by a few days, considering the amount of requests from you all. So before this, the submission deadline was scheduled for 8th of February, but now we'll be extending it by a few days. So you can use the book of abstracts if needed and submit your abstracts accordingly.
Uh, Hi Gauri, I'm Nilesh here. I practice and I also teach in as a visiting capacity into schools in Bombay. And I just kind of came to know about this platform or this kind of talk about the research and which really intrigued me. I didn't know it was for the NASA and for the specific purpose. I just came to know when you were talking about, the students were asking questions. I mean, uh, I just joined it purely because I think even in the schools as faculty, I think this is one such a difficult space, and there's so very less conversations to even kind of start talking about what it is, how to go ahead, and kind of then lead the younger people. Uh, are there any kind of platforms I don't know to reach out to conversations to anything? Just as a faculty, I'm saying maybe not as
Yeah.
students. I think it's not really valid, but I can start from the school, I guess.
Hmm. So there is one called Patio, which is the platform for architectural transfers in the Indian Ocean Rim. If you Google Patio Conversations, that
Okay.
is an event that happens online on the third Thursday or the second Thursday of every month. And the format is that we usually have two scholars who are presenting their research, and there is a third person who is having a who's discussing the research. So that's one side. Of course, a lot of that is architectural history related, but that's definitely one place. Apart from that, we do have conferences and things, but the research landscape in India is generally quite dispersed. It's not a particularly well organized thing. But then there is like I think many schools now are doing dissertation symposiums. So they're bringing together. Yeah, but I think we don't have enough conversations for sure. Um, I think maybe this is an opportunity for NASA to invite more researchers because then it just becomes a great way of kind of sharing work in progress as well. So, yeah, I think this might be an opportunity to try and do something like that because, like, I have a couple of people visiting Anant in March, and we are looking to do open conversation in a hybrid mode. So, there'll be some online presentations. But did you mean like conversations about research or researchers talking about their work?
Uh, so the research in terms of the context of the school. I'm a teacher at undergrad,
Hmm.
and hence, so from that context, what
Okay.
research is, how does one kind of think through research, what I mean, obviously a really wide kind of thing, but
Yeah.
from that perspective, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely don't have enough. I think we'll look at the possibilities,
Sure,
and I think
sure,
if there is something, definitely try and
sure.
circulate and see. If there's interest in having conversations about research, I'm definitely happy to facilitate that because I mean, I am a researcher. That's what I do, and I've taught research now for many many years. So very happy to facilitate more conversations around this if that is something that's of interest for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for joining. I hope the session was helpful for you, and looking forward to see your abstracts. Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks, Javin. Thank you,
Thank you,
NASA
ma'am.
team. Thanks. Bye bye. Good night.
Thank you.